All right, so let's get started. So the meeting is being recorded, and we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So we are kickstarting our first iteration of the qualitative research and AI webinar series. So I am Prajwal. I'm the CEO and founder of Qualz.ai, and we are putting these events together to bring the industry experts here and just discuss the upcoming implications of AI in the field of qualitative research. So each session will be a little bit different, but we'll stay on topic in that intersection. And I'm very excited to host this session. And we have with us Dr. Tashi Gurung, who will be co-hosting and also answering from his perspective. So he's an expert in qualitative research and has been doing qualitative research for quite a while in several industries. And we have Dr. Jacobson, who is a professor at University of Cincinnati, and he's also a qualitative researcher, an anthropologist, and has a very rich experience in the intersection of qualitative research and health, and has been interested in exploring some AI tools. So we'll have that as general discussions. So before we kickstart this, I'd like to mention that I think like some of the links that went out went to other like meeting link or something. So we might have some people spread out, but we will send a recording to everyone so we can get started to that. All right, so to kick things off, I'll start with maybe just giving some time for Dr. Tashi and Dr. Jacobson to do a quick intro and about what their experience is with qualitative research, their activities around it. So maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Tashi.
Yeah, thank you, Prajwal, for inviting me. I think with the wave of AI and the word AI being so ubiquitous everywhere, I think it's important that we talk about it, and it's even more important that we continue to talk about it, not just one time, two time. I think it's here to stay, and I think I'm very thankful for a webinar like this. I think your effort to build a community where people can safely talk about the concerns, the possibilities, the potential, I think this is great. With that said, yeah, let me introduce myself very shortly because we want to talk about AI, and there's a lot to talk about. So my name is Tashi Wongdi Gurung, and I'm an anthropologist by training. And like Prajwal said, I've been involved in qualitative research for a very long time, actually a lot longer than I'd like to admit, because in my earlier years, I would do some work without knowing that's qualitative research or parts of qualitative research. So I have experience in public policy, a nonprofit organization, and as of late in education research. So I'm looking forward to talk about it.
All right, thank you, and Dr. Gurung. So Dr. Jacobson, if you can do the same.
Certainly. As Prajwal said, I'm a professor of anthropology. I'm at the University of Cincinnati. I'm also excited to have discussions around some of these new technologies. I'm a researcher trained in anthropology, medical and psychological anthropology primarily. I did dissertation research in the Puerto Rican community in Cleveland, and Spanish and English. And my work at the University of Cincinnati has kind of pulled me a little bit more into an applied direction. And so my appointment at the University of Cincinnati, at least initially, had me, kind of split between the College of Medicine and the Department of Anthropology. And, they wanted the ethnographic and qualitative cultural perspective that a social scientist could bring to some of their research. And so I collaborated and consulted and partnered on a bunch of research projects over the years, from family medicine projects that look at the role of medical assistants in the transformations that are going on in primary care, to occupational health studies of hard-to-reach populations like immigrant Latinos, who are a priority population, and a number of studies developing measurements and working on the qualitative aspects of measure development for patient outcomes or patient-reported outcomes research. So I've worked primarily with others after my dissertation work, and I've gotten educated by my colleagues over the years, and I can really see potential for emerging technologies to move some of the difficult obstacles that are associated with qualitative research. So I'm excited to work on this with Tashi and Prajwal. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Jacobson. So we've seen a lot of chatter around AI, right? So there is the field is definitely changing. We don't know where it will end up and how impactful AI will play in terms of like the different aspects of qualitative research, from data collection all the way to analysis, right? So there is potential that we see, but still like a lot to really figure out for us as researchers in this field. I think it's in general, AI has made a lot of significant strides in other industries, right? We're also seeing a little bit of implication in the qualitative field. So Dr. Jacobson, from your vantage point, what do you see as maybe some of the most important benefits and some challenges that AI might offer, right? Particularly maybe in the context of health research that you've been in.
So, well, I think for me, at this point in kind of working with you guys and the technology and discussing what it might be able to do and playing with it a little bit, I think the things that stand out for me more than anything, because as a qualitative researcher, I generate and work with texts. And while, there's a lot of information that's available in an interview with someone or in an ethnographic study, most of the research that I do kind of, compresses that information into textual form. And, once we get a transcript created, the work goes into reading and summarizing and coding and understanding text, right? So because of that orientation in the research that I do, to me, it immediately kind of it presents itself, AI, because it does seem like it's one of these things that I'm not asking it to generate anything other than maybe summaries or codes or that kind of thing, that it's language written in textual form. And isn't that what the large language models are? I mean, it's kind of how it's trained. It feels to me, even though I haven't had a chance to play with it too much, that it's going to be very good at some things that have to do with text analysis.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Definitely, I think from my perspective, right? So I come from a background in AI. I also spend a lot of time in this subfield of AI called natural language processing. And from my perspective too, like the big step change that the last couple of years we've seen is just the ability of the AI models of now to understand general language, which was very different before. We used to train these like very specific models for specific purposes. We call it like narrow AI models now, that we have a little bit of a general sense of AI that understands language. And that's one of the reasons that we're like really excited about seeing what implications this will have in understanding conversations and unstructured text. So really excited from that perspective. So Dr. Gurung, you've also explored like this the newest versions of AI and looking at the trajectory, right? So it looks like it is getting faster, cheaper, smarter at the same time, right? What are your perspectives on how you've seen it being used, and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything Dr. Jacobson said, but to add on to that, so I still remember my team at work, we started writing a report on what ChatGPT means to academia in terms of pedagogy, in terms of research, after it was announced in November 2022. So I have been on top of this for a while, and I think while I was at it, I, of course, out of curiosity, tried what ChatGPT can do, and it could do things that I never thought would be possible. But at the same time, I think to speak of what it exactly can do, I think is a little premature. So when you talk about the benefits and challenges of I think we are at a stage where we are still very much exploring both the benefits and challenges. And I think challenges even more because there is so many uncertainties. But let me tell you that when I used your company service just to try out, as a way to help out a friend, I was actually surprised by some of the work that it did. I mean, of course, you had put a lot of thoughts into the rigorness of what it takes to do qualitative analysis. So in ChatGPT, it can summarize you, but your platform can actually analyze it. And I'm pretty sure it's improved since then. But a lot of people not in this field do not understand the difference between summarization and analysis. Analysis, you read between lines. There is a very strict process, very rigorous, and I saw that your platform had open coding, sorting code, categorization of them, generation of themes and sub-themes. So that was pretty impressive. And again, I don't want to say that it's doing a very, very good job, but I think it's doing a pretty good job. I mean, when I see those kind of work, I think it just makes me think, what else can it do? But what
Right.
makes me even think more is what are the consequences of this? Like things that we're not aware of, like what happens to the model if it is talking about something else. A lot of uncertainties, So I don't know. I think it's very difficult for me to speak of long-term future, but I definitely believe in the potential, and I think the only way to know is just to dive into it and do what you are doing. And on our part, we continue using them, assessing them, basically. So hopefully I answered your question. I can go on a tangent when talking about AI.
Yeah. So that was very interesting because we have had the similar kinds of exploration exercises where we're looking at what does a very large language model that can do a lot of general things, right? So the ChatGPT is meant to be a general helpful assistant, right? So when we look at that and then look at it from a qualitative research perspective, it actually does okay, right? Even out of the box. And that is very interesting in terms of like both taking on a role of an interviewer or coding some responses. It's very interesting, but it's also not there yet because it misses that a mark in terms of like behavior and what it should do, and then what it shouldn't do actually, right? So it's a very general purpose kind of model, but there is definitely a lot that could have been done, and we're definitely working towards what are all these different pieces and segments of the process, and how can we make each one more catered to the process of qualitative research, right? So similar experiences in building as well, and yeah, thank you for trying it out and always being there when we're coming up with like new features. So one of the things that come up is also like the different segments or the different sub-steps in the qualitative research, right? So I have mentioned that we are looking into AI that assists in research design, in qualitative coding, and then also in interviewing to some extent, right? So Dr. Jacobson, from your experience, like vast experience in these particular things that you complete in a project, which do you think like will be more amenable to AI, and where do you think like will be the most risks associated with using AI?
Yeah, so So right, there are a lot of different steps in the process of conducting qualitative research, and different steps in different kinds of qualitative research, I suppose. But again, to kind of go back to the idea that I do interviews and collect interviews in my research, that is to say, collect texts or responses to questions that I think about in relation to the literature, right? And so the research questions that I'm asking require me to review the literature and think about that, and so I can see some potential for some of the claimed abilities of AI is to help review the literature, identify and review the literature, and in that sense contribute to an informed research question that whose results or findings would also contribute to the literature. So I think there's some of that front end stuff, and I look forward to seeing how that works, and I would love to try out, here's a handful of research articles, what can AI do to help me comprehend the differences and the importance and whatnot in an identified set of articles. But more to the question of, I suppose, research design, I think that's a pretty important point where, obviously humans need to be involved and understanding the political and ethical and practical issues that go into deciding what research gets done and doesn't, is very human. But it can benefit from the help of technology, I think. In any case, the research design, I would say maybe that's not what I'm looking for right now. I have a lot of transcripts. I have a lot of data that I have analyzed, and a lot of data that I've analyzed and published, a lot of data that I've analyzed and haven't published, and a lot of data that I haven't analyzed. And in qualitative research, I've learned in my career shift going from kind of the sole researcher, ethnographer to team member in qualitative studies, that it's very nice to work with others and to have multiple interpretations of texts and to discuss differences and discuss contexts together. And that's time intensive, and you got to get everybody on the same page. It's kind of the herding cats, and some people are a little bit better at that in terms of not being ego involved. And this is interpretation. It's all like we're all kind of guessing at what's going on in many cases. So the potential utility of an AI application, a focused one, that I can say, I need to analyze these texts and get a publication because I did some good research interviews and I think there's some good stuff here, but it's so much work and I'm really question whether I'm giving this the right interpretation. So it feels to me, to get to that part of your question, that is one of the most immediate kinds of potential uses for a program like we're discussing, or AI like we're discussing. This is not a program. It's to take this collection of texts that I have and start seeing how an AI application would interpret and code and otherwise read these texts with me. So those are the things that I think are most immediately enticing, and as I think users would get used to I think there's a lot of people out there like myself who have texts that represent these big monkeys on their backs, in a sense, that they need help with. So I could see a lot of people getting into that quickly and then having ideas about wanting to use the tool for other things just because they're using it to analyze their texts. So anyways, it feels like it's ready to take off.
Right. Yeah. So that's something we've seen as well. So when we go about doing qualitative analysis as humans, like we take on a path and we decide that path, and then once we're through that path, we usually cannot really go back and say, I wish I had looked at it from a different angle, right? But I think one of the benefits we see with AI, and some of our clients have been saying the same thing as well, is that they can still go and do the qualitative analysis for a certain number of transcripts or a certain follow a particular framework. But there's always the question, what if I would have looked at it from a different angle, right? Or what if I do certain things and use the AI's collaboration in doing the others and then combine those collaborations and insights somewhere, right? So that has been definitely what we have seen as well in terms of some of the slam dunk kind of like use cases, right? Low risk, getting used to the flow of working together with AI. And to touch upon the other point, I think the literature review, I think it's also kind of a slam dunk in terms of just the scale at which it can go broadly and then find some things and surface it to the human. And as long as it's not making the final decision, I think we have a way to mitigate that because it's surfacing up. Here's like 10 papers you ought to look at, right? And then you can be like, okay, some of these make sense, some of it doesn't, and you can send it on another exploration exercise while you're going through and looking at and reading some of them. So yeah, thank you for sharing your insights there. I think definitely we're also working hard to make the process of collaborating more and more efficient between humans and AI, because ultimately it's going to be about that collaboration and that acceleration in terms of how wide we can go and how deep we can go, right? It's I think humans and AI will be different skill level at these different tasks for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So Tashi, a question for you. So Dr. Jacobson touched upon the research design aspect of it, where you're looking at all the literature review and then also the secondary research aspect of it, right? So let's touch upon a little bit on the AI doing the framework-based type analysis. Have you, with like ChatGPT or tools like Qualz.ai, do you have any experience in giving it like additional context or information as it's going through the analysis process? And could you speak about like where the limitations are?
Yeah, actually, before I do that, let me just reiterate and say that I think before when you asked that question to Dr. Jacobson, I was thinking about responding to that question myself as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
And for me, it really depends on the discipline. And in my career, I have been in academia for a long time, but post PhD, I have been in industry. So what I have realized over time is really dependent on what's the purpose of the research. So in academia, it's mostly contribution to theory, knowledge production, and that's where you really have to dive into literature to be abreast of what's happening in that discipline. And that's where you really have to look into other papers, like what's happening. And but I've also experienced working with the corporate industries, and they don't really care about literature as much. I'm not saying they don't care at all, but not as much, right? So my recent project with Google DeepMind, and they don't care about literature as much because they're doing a product research. And they're doing qualitative research to understand customer journey for user experience. And they don't really care about literature as much because the product they're coming up with is totally new. Right. So there is no other information. So first, we need to remember what's the purpose of the research, right? But again, if I have to answer as one, I would say the role of AI in literature review, as Dr. Jacobson pointed out, I think is most significant and most promising at this point because it's a synthesization of words. And there are other aspects of qualitative research, such as data collection, data analysis, which can be a little tricky, So I would say literature review, I think that's a lot of tools are already out there, assisting with that task. But I'm also starting to think about data collection. Like if you are doing an ethnographic research, I don't think AI can anytime soon help you much. But if you're doing a research where you are using semi-structured or very structured interview questions, then they can do it, because you're not probing a lot. You're not really diving into an experience of, to exploring the nuances. You're asking questions that you're supposed to ask. And then there are research that they do just because they want to understand, I guess you are more into market research. So I think it really depends on that. But for an analysis component, I think, again, if it's a theory, it's a framework based. I think I have tried one scenario using your service, using framework analysis, and I think it does actually, I have to say that it does a better job than just doing like open analysis or like inductive or deductive, whatever. Because when you do a framework analysis, you're giving some kind of instructions to the AI. In general term, you would say, the prompts that you give to the AI are more specific. And if there is anything we learned from ChatGPT, is that your response are as good as your prompts. So an argument can be made on that part as well. But again, I can go on, and I don't want to, just go on tangent. So with that said, I'll just let you ask another question.
Yeah, no, that was really insightful. So I think that echoes like what Dr. Jacobson is saying from the perspective of like literature review as well, right? Because we have to go wide before we go deep, and just AI is very good at doing things in parallel and going at multiple databases and doing skimming, right? So that's definitely something we've seen. Now, as far as like the AI-based interviews go, again, like my notion is that it's going to be a bit of a collaboration effort, because at first you can't just send a very general type of interview agent to do very specific tasks, right? You have to be able to understand its behavior and then make sure that it doesn't ask leading questions and stuff, right? Things that I've talked to Dr. Jacobson about for many times, like what makes a good qualitative researcher, right? So Dr. Jacobson has classes on it and stuff. So it's very fascinating. But at the same time, that is on the behavioral aspect of the qualitative research agent. But there is also the aspect of just asking the right questions, right? Going in and probing deep. I think that will keep on getting better and better, right? But at the same time, there is still like a big role for humans to play in terms of the narrow and deep, going narrow and deep, right? Versus AI going a little bit wide, so that you don't lose that long tail of insights. And exactly what you said, we've seen is that on like semi-structured with some probes already defined, where the AI's role is to choose one of those probes, or structured, those are slam dunk, right? But the unstructured one, it's really hard to really assess the quality of it, right? And that's something that we've been thinking about and struggling with, is like, once a session is done, like an unstructured interview session is done, how do we understand that the AI did its job correctly, right? It asked the right kind of probe questions. It didn't do some maybe like biased questions. And we are even working on something, and anybody can sign up to like try it, right? I'll be happy to walk people through it. Is that we have these sessions of AI that get like smarter over time. So you have an interview, and then it learns a few things from the interview, and the second interview can change a little bit, right? So that might not fly very well with IRB and those kinds of requirements, right? We don't actually have to ask all the questions at all interviews. I think humans are very good at doing this. But like with AI, it's a whole lot of like custom building and stuff. So with that, all that context being laid out, right? Maybe Dr. Jacobson, from your experience, right? So could you talk a little bit about what do you look for when, what makes a good interview, and where do you think like the AI of today, from your experience, right, like falls short?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and you can have a whole class on interviewing. There's so many different kinds of interviews, as you suggested, from very structured ones that like we see in surveys, to semi-structured ones like I use a lot in my qualitative research, to much more unstructured, spontaneous interviews that can be very much a part of ethnographic research. And I do think there's some potential for ethnographic research to actually be impacted sooner rather than later, just because so much of, because ethnographic research becoming multimodal. And so, pictures and video and text, but also, notes and interviews and all the same old kinds of things. And all of those, can get fed into some framework over a period of time and space that I think can be, profitably analyzed, once you kind of work out the kinks. So yeah, interviews are tough, and I do teach. In fact, the course I'm teaching now in medical anthropology, one of the assignments is for students to go out and interview somebody older about their health and about their experience with healthcare and their beliefs about healthcare systems and those kinds of things. And I've done this every year for 20 years, once or twice a year at least. And there's, some students who get it, and or some students who maybe already have a sense of engaging in conversation with others and learning to listen, so that you don't sit down with a computer program or a checklist and simply focus on your questions. You kind of test the waters. You sit down with the person and you have to have, for interviews to be good, you have to have clarity about what your research question is. I think that's what makes the student interviews hard, because they're not really doing research. I have to convince them that they can tell the person that they're doing this for the purpose of learning and experiencing doing an interview, because it's a useful human skill to focus, use a focused manner to ask people questions and let them express their experiences and perspectives and ideas without imposing a structure on them or without kind of reading into everything that's being said. So it's not as easy as it sounds. It's very anthropological in that sense. It's let's get what anthropologists call the emic perspective. And so I would judge an AI agent into its ability to reflect on meaning in the context of a conversation. What do you mean when you say, oh, doctors' visits were so much better back 30 years ago? Can you give me an example of that? Because some people would just say, oh, well, right, of course, because today's system's worse. But then we're kind of missing what we want to know, which is, how is it worse today and how was it better before, when, Dr. Welby showed up at your door and with his black bag. So I try to get students, and if they can just show me that they've done that once or twice in an interview, I'll call it a success, where they actually wait until they hear what the person says and don't go on to their next question. They use what they heard to ask the next question, right? To get clarification, to dig deeper. And so there's a recursive loop in good interviews, I think, that the person feels listened to and there's an opportunity to clarify. And so, I think that kind of thing doesn't seem impossible to me with computers, but I don't think it's going to be up to the level that, maybe a good interviewer like Terry Gross or Joe Rogan or whoever we think is a good interviewer might have, that they've developed over years by doing this and being curious and those kinds of things.
Right. Yeah, totally. I mean, or Dr. Jacobson or Dr. Gurung. For sure. So I think the role of AI will be somewhere in the tool set of, I think, like a qualitative researcher or lead researcher, ethnographer, right? So they can probably use it in some cases. And some cases it will be a little bit of a stretch, even as AI gets more and more advanced, but there will always be the case from my perspective of missing context. So at Qualz, we try to have what we call an expanding context. So as soon as you start creating a study, everything that goes in becomes part of that context, including the literature. But that is just like what you can put in, right? There's so much more to human experience that is always going to be that missing context. Especially like Dr. Gurung mentioned, like ethnographic studies where you just spend a lot of time understanding the culture, the geography, everything like that before you even start the first question, right? So there's definitely that piece to it. And to touch upon Dr. Jacobson comment really quick on the reflection part, right? I think that's one of the reasons that, if you use role-playing aspect of these general type large models that are out there like ChatGPT, one of the things that will be missing is they are trained to be helpful assistants to answer questions, not necessarily to be good interviewers. So they will not have that reflection loop, right? Even if you try to prompt them into it. And that's one thing that we've definitely seen, that we have to custom build all these orchestrations and tools and behaviors into the AI agent to be at least good enough interviewers, so that people feel that they are useful in the process. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about like ethics and privacy concerns and stuff, right? So I want to end like the discussions around like 45 or to 50, so that we have some time for Q&A. So if people have some questions, I think the Q&A should be on, so you can start sending in the questions. And then we'll just take some questions as they come in. Feel free to also like message me if we're connected in some other platform. Yeah, Dr. Tashi, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually, before we move on to that, I just wanted to say something. I think you asked a really good question. What is a good interview? And at the risk of sounding very cliche, I would say, as I was taught, that the best interview is a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we really need to think, can AI have conversation with us? Now, having conversation and asking questions are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so we really need to think, can AI have conversation with us? The other thing that we really need to think about is, well, when you're interviewing, it really depends on the person who is interviewing. Are they being biased? Are they asking leading questions and things like that? But then there are some studies that are saying that some people feel more comfortable when they're interacting with the AI because they don't feel like they're being judged.
Mm-hmm.
So I bring this up because when you're interviewing someone, at least in my practice, the one thing that I care about is making my participant feel very comfortable. So they are honest, they speak their mind, and I get a good quality of data. So I think these are the things that we really need to think. But again, with that said, not all the interviews are meant to be conversation. Especially in market research, they don't care about conversation. They will ask you a question they want the answer for.
Mm-hmm.
For example, they ask, what do you look for a shoe when you buy? And as soon as I say, oh, I love the design, the color, whatever, they don't care about other stuff. But as an ethnographer, you want to understand, dive into their experience. So it really depends on those factors. And these questions are so complex that we cannot really answer in like a 1 hour webinar. But I just wanted to bring it out there. So those are things that we need to think.
Yeah, definitely. Even in market research, like I've seen some researchers use it for much more broader like needs assessment, where you don't really go into the details of a specific product. It's more of a conversation in that sense, right? So talking about what is the job you're trying to do, what kind of background activities fit into that job as you hire like a product to do a job for you, right? So it's really interesting the conversation aspect of it. I think that also flows in very well to one of the things you said was people might feel actually more comfortable talking to AI agents for certain subfields or certain types of interviews, right? So that I think from our experience, what we've seen is that is true if the AI that they're talking to, they know the standards of privacy and anonymity, right? Because the whole reason that people don't want to maybe talk about sensitive topics to other humans is I think the dynamic of just having another human while they're talking about something deep. But at the same time, when you're talking with an AI and you're revealing some of these things, you also need that kind of guarantee of privacy and anonymity, right? So that has come up a lot. So maybe let's start on that topic as a segue. And Dr. Jacobson, what are your thoughts on where you see some of the security privacy type of risks, and are they really something that we can mitigate?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, risk. Yeah, I mean, there are clearly risks. I guess, you know, my experience in the university system with AI at this point is just, you know, policies being made about not using AI to answer your, you know, to do your essays, and how to tell if you think a student's using AI to finish some assignment. And so, you know, it's kind of looking at the negative side of humans, and whatnot. And I actually lost my train of thought. We were you were talking about, there's something else I didn't really want to say, and I'm just
Yeah, so yeah, in this case, we're talking about like when we talk to AI interview agents or have AI interview or AI analysis agents, like look at the initial open coding or even like some of the thematic parts, right? So there is concerns of privacy and specifically, yeah, privacy and security. Specifically, like if you look at ChatGPT, a lot of people are using it, even though people might not say they are using it, right? So this is the shadow culture, just like asking everything there.
Yeah.
And they actually train on your data, right? So that's what I've seen, and people have a lot of concern with that.
Yeah, that's where I was going with this, and I think so. I do think that these risks can be mitigated in people's minds in part by understanding the technology better, and I think there's a bit of a hurdle to get people over. I think to understand some of the different technologies that are involved here. I think it's been a little bit of a hurdle for me. You guys have been helping me to a certain extent kind of figure some of this out, but there are AI, GPT type things that have been trained on data that's just publicly available. And if you put more data into it, this open AI format, well, you're basically giving it your data, and you don't really have control over whether it's somehow gets sucked back out of the AI and in what form, and whether there's identifiable information. So that if people can understand that when you are helping produce a text or provide information, that it's only in the context of that study and study questions, although the AI has been trained on language using large language models, it's being applied only to this text, which won't be absorbed, right? I mean, this is kind of how I've come to understand it. And to me, it makes it feel so much safer. But if people can be shown that that's true, and if people can clearly draw these distinctions in their mind about the different, the different outcomes of putting data into something, I think that's going to be a big part of it. I think education about the technology will help uptake of it, because I don't, the online stuff that's asking you to put your information in, I really haven't used much, and I don't really want to. I want to use these more focused kinds of applications first, because I think there's more promise, and I think you guys have a good one.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Jacobson. Dr. Gurung, your thoughts on the ethical and the privacy part of AI in qualitative research?
Yeah. I think that's a biggest concern, and ever since I've been started keeping myself abreast to all this information and development and all this evolvement of open AI and generative AI, that's all they talk about. And to really think back, I don't think a lot of people understand how AI works, and they're just concerned about it because that's been the hard thing to say, right? But I think it's definitely a concern. I think the other thing is that this is the price we pay for, a lot of things, right? Like for using ChatGPT. I know so many people that cannot imagine their life now without ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
I do, and I can name them, but I won't. Just kidding. But what I'm saying is that people have to be aware, right? And when you are doing research through proper channel, we have IRB in place and a lot of other protocols. And these are the concerns that were always there even before AI. The problem with AI is that, the risk is amplified, and definitely need to think about that. And again, I think following best practices is one thing, but again, I don't have a technological background, but I think you might know better. But I know for a fact that it's a concern, and there has to be things done. But again, how do we even know if we don't use it? So I think that's why we need to use it and then try it and then see it and assess it. And then I wanted to bring up something about the theory, the TAM theory, technology acceptance model, which looks at factors that contributes or that explores the usability, the adoption, and the acceptance of new technology. And I think that's where we researchers and a technology person like yourself, Prajwal, should come together and really think about all these things, because I feel like a lot of people are jumping into this bandwagon of AI without knowing enough about it. And I think without knowing enough about it, you cannot say, okay, this is the concern, this is a problem, without really diving deep into it. And I think we need to do that first. That's what I think. But it's a heavy conversation.
Yeah, totally. I think like and there's also the saying that if you're not kind of paying for the product, then you're the product, right? So a lot of the times, I think a quick thing that people can do using ChatGPT for like research is kind of turn off that mode where it keeps the history, right? To Dr. Jacobson's point, if you're using ChatGPT for analysis, let's say, right, or any of the other open models out there, then the reason they are out there is because they are collecting all the data for the next version, right? And if you don't turn that off, then the models will go and learn all your data and your whatever you're talking about during the training of the next model, and some insights or even some personal information that was there might surface to somebody else across the globe or maybe next door or something, right? Which is definitely risky. So there are ways to easily mitigate it in terms of like the tools you're already using, but definitely we've taken that into account, right? And we don't necessarily touch any of the client's data for training and all that stuff, right? So in our platform, so that has been a big thing for us internally. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. I think maybe we can move into Q&A a little bit. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I will read out the first question. Let's see which one of us can take this. So has there been any progress using AI for translating qualitative transcripts? The current translation and transcription services are expensive. Therefore, possibility of using AI for translation holds the potential to make it cost effective. However, I'm also a little concerned about cultural nuances to translation and having culturally responsive translation services. I know Dr. Jacobson is multilingual. I know you've been talking about Spanish. I don't know how proficient you are there, but you have done some research in Spanish language. Maybe you can touch upon the translation and the cultural nuances aspect.
Yeah, so those are good points, and you need bilingual speakers to pick up those nuances a lot of times. Or you need a native speaker to pick it up in one language and explain it to the person in the other. I think it's a background issue for me. Most of the research projects that I've been working on recently, some of them actually use AI, but they're in English. And there's very minor mistakes that you can immediately identify and dismiss, basically. And so I think it's already totally made itself known in that part of the world, or in that part of the research. But the translation piece, it does still seem to need human in the loop there somehow. And I don't know. I know that the translations are getting better too in AI, and that sounds like that's another thing that's happening a lot. But again, this is something that is meaning centered. It's nuanced human meaning, and I think a human needs to be in the loop until we're convinced that it's not necessary.
So Dr. Gurung, your thoughts on this? I know you've done research across the world as well.
Yeah, this is a very interesting question, to be honest, and I think there's layers to it. Let me give you an example. When I first came to Arizona, they have the self-driving cars, but the policy was that there has to be a driver behind the seat. That went on for 5 years, and now they don't require a driver. That's the approach I have with AI. I don't think I trust AI 100% right now. I think AI and humans should work together in collaboration, and that's where I think the question, my response to the question lies, right? I think you cannot trust, even with humans. When I was doing my research, I was doing an interview in local language, in a national language, which all eventually translates to English. So even if it's a human person that's doing all the translation, which by the way takes like 8 hours for 1 hour of interview if everything goes smoothly. So that's a massive undertaking in terms of time and resources.
Right.
But even when human does it, the human needs to have a proper understanding of the culture. Sometimes same word mean different things. So that is a problem as it is without AI, but AI definitely amplifies it. And I think the only, again, to look on the positive side, efficient, cost effective, and all that is there. But I think still, I think the only way to know is that let the AI do the work, but have human in the loop, as Dr. Jacobson said. I think it's a collaborative effort right now. I think there has to be human over it. You cannot overlook. I think human has to be a part of it at this stage, at least. And I mean, we cannot always look at only the positive aspect.
Yeah.
One of my main pain point as a researcher is scheduling interviews.
Mm-hmm.
I interviewed almost 200 people for my PhD thesis. That means 200 hours. And in an ideal world, if an AI can do it, those 200 interviews will be done in 1 hour. But if I think about the quality, it's not going to be the same. So you cannot get two laddus at hand. You have to pick one. You can. I think. See what I did there. So the translation, even when human speaks it, it's different. Laddu is sweet.
Right.
It doesn't make sense to you, Dr. Jacobson, because there's that cultural context when I use the word laddu. So this is my point exactly. So some of these concerns have always been there, will always be there.
Yeah, yes, sounds good. I think we are also geared up towards that with human in the loop. So we do translations, but to the original question's point, I think using AI for translation, if done with the right user experience and the right quality of AI in the loop, right? So I think it will increase efficiency, but it won't be a full solution, especially if you have a bilingual speaker, right? Definitely all the tools should allow for corrections. But to your point, Dr. Gurung, the scale of it is what becomes difficult to put like a human in the loop sometime, right? If you're doing 10,000 research interviews, it starts to become difficult, and you have to trust the AI at some point,
right?
But still have that doubts in your mind.
No.
Right?
I think
did it get it?
My response was in terms of the cultural nuances and the context. I think AI is doing a wonderful job translating different languages. Otter, Rev, they're all already using it.
Right.
It's already out there, especially if it's major languages like French, Chinese, even Hindi or Spanish. Sorry. So, they're already doing a wonderful job of translating. It's just the cultural nuances and the context. That's what I was referring to.
Got it. Yeah. Sounds good. So let's go to the next question. So this next question is, let me get to it. So this question has to do with, let me read it first. So AI systems are only as good as the data they are trained on. Given the potential for bias in AI-driven research, do you believe that AI unintentionally reinforce existing biases in health outcomes? How should we address this to ensure fairness and equity in research findings? So I think in a future state, right, when we're doing more and more research with AI in health, I think just the point of like bias becomes super important, right? So I think this is directed to you, Dr. Jacobson. So given the potential for bias in AI-driven research, I'm sure it means qualitative research, right? So how do you understand the bias difference between humans and AI, and the useful bias and the non-useful bias? Maybe can you touch upon that a little bit?
Well, so yeah, I think it's an empirical question. I mean, I think it's the kind of thing that we want to study and look at and find measures of bias and criteria for assessing bias. I mean, I can imagine that, because of the socioeconomic, sociocultural splits in our society, that some people have more of their language online that's accessible to be trained with than other people, and that there's a normalization of certain forms of language that go on if training of a tool is based on a subset of a larger, sample, and that the, application of those norms to language that maybe isn't as commonly found on the internet is going to introduce some bias. It's exactly how, I don't know, but I can imagine just, everyday kinds of things, people with accents, or speaking of African American vernacular language, or other kinds of things that I think these are questions that need to be asked, and research that needs to be done in formal ways. And it's a little bit hard because things are changing so fast, right? But I think it's likely that there is bias, and that you need to be aware and look on the lookout for it, right? As you do your research. So again, it's a human in the loop kind of thing. And all of this stuff, right? My data is in the anonymity and confidentiality of the subjects and the text, and so all of this stuff I'm kind of worried about when I do research. And so if I'm letting an AI, it's going to be the same for a computer algorithm that's trying to tell me what it sees in a text.
Correct.
I have checked it myself. So that would be my kind of medium length answer.
Yeah, so my take on this is also I think the bias in AI is an interesting thing to understand, because it has so many sources, right? So it can be biased due to the structure of the neural network, right? It can only learn certain things and not others, and maybe certain things it learns better than humans, certain things it doesn't, right? And the bigger, the big elephant in the room is also where the data is being sourced from, right? So that has a human element. So who was sourcing that data, and what was the recency bias in that data? What was the sampling bias in terms of the companies that are training the very large models are sampling from what is readily available, rather than going for curating all the quality, unless it has effect on some benchmarks that they are aiming for, right? So maybe some of the bias benchmarks are not that well defined currently, so they're not even targeting those benchmarks. So that has implications all the way to how that data is collected. But generally, at a very high level, I think AI is intelligent, right? But the intelligence is sort of alien. It is not the same kind of intelligence as human intelligence, right? So there is that angle of bias there as well, which is super interesting, because it surfaces up in interesting areas. So I think my answer to that question will be definitely it'll depend on AI. We'll have to do a lot of the benchmarking for that specific AI. And I think a call out is that, instead of using a very general AI that continually switches and changes, right? I think for critical purposes, definitely like a specialist AI or a special purpose AI that is meant for that and has been benchmarked for these cases. And we know, so there's a lot less unknown unknowns, right? So that is what I would say. Dr. Gurung, do you have anything to add to that? I think that's the last question we can take. So we had a couple of more questions, but I will send it to the speakers, and maybe we can respond
Sure.
when we send the recordings.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're right at time. So Dr. Gurung, you want to maybe respond to that really quick, and then I'll wrap up.
Yeah, with the bias thing, I think there's always going to be bias. I think that's just a human nature. We all try our best to minimize the bias to the best of our abilities, but there's always going to be bias. And I think, again, the only way to work effectively and move effectively forward is to keep trying using it, as a researcher. I believe in, the more sample size you have, the better, the more you can derive insights from. So with that said, that's it. And again, this is important conversation. That's why I really want to thank you for putting this webinar together, so we can continue, because this is you cannot talk about everything in one webinar, so
Yeah, we have a couple more of these planned. Thank you, Dr. Gurung. So thank you for everyone that joined. We had like a lot more people, but for some reason our registration links got like a little mixed. So we had like 2 people joining on like 2 different sessions or like 2 groups. So we're going to send a recording and for everybody's questions that we couldn't answer, I'll circulate it to the speakers so we can quickly respond to that. And we will also do a readout on it as an article so people can read it and you'll get the recordings. So again, thank you for joining. If you're interested in speaking, you can also find the speaker form at the in the registration link. And we'll do these monthly, and we have some speakers lined up that we'll be talking about very soon. So thank you, everyone. This is great. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Dr. Jacobson, and thank you,
You're
Dr.
welcome.
Gurung.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend,
Bye-bye.
everybody.